Welcome back to another episode of Who Saved Over My Podcast. I'm your host, Neil Strebig. With me, as always, is Donald Double D DeCray.
Today, I guess we've got coming up our longer discussion about the great debate between single players and MMOs. Single player games were declared officially dead a while ago by one gaming exec. And I tend to agree. I really do think we've moved past that. But I see you shaking your head over there, Neil. You seem to think single player is where it's at?
Yeah, I completely disagree with that. And quite frankly, I think we're seeing a return to single player RPGs, especially over the last year, more so than I think in the last, decade or so. But I mean, we'll get to that as far as, which one's better and why this resurgence. But quite frankly, I mean, MMOs, I think, are the inferior games overall.
And obviously, you would be wrong. Which it's just crazy to hear you taking the side of single player games, given your experiences in basically every RPG where you've just taken the dark path, ruined the world.
Whoa, I didn't take a dark path. I mean, listen, Fallout 2, it was, I thought killing vampires was the right thing to do, and then I had to kill a whole town instead. And my Fable stuff, Fable it's a crazy experience. I tried to marry a prostitute in the first two games.
Your Mass Effect stuff.
Yes, my Mass Effect, yes, as well. Tried to take a cavalier approach and bit me in the ass a couple times.
Other single player games you've done, how have those gone for you?
The rest are pretty good. I can't complain. My Metal Gear Solid experience is always, fine. Metal Gear Solid 5 was okay. Got the proper ending on that.
Yeah, sure. So I guess we'll get into that in a little bit.
On to the topic at hand. RPGs versus MMOs. Before we even get started, I mean, the acronyms themselves, RPG stands for role-playing game, traditional kind of single-player games. MMO is massive multiplayer online, if I'm not mistaken. Sometimes you'll have MMO RPGs, combining the two, like something like World of Warcraft. Mm-hmm. But ultimately, RPG versus MMO really comes down to single player versus a multiplayer game. Personally, I'm in the RPG camp. Double D is the MMO camp. Absolutely. But how we're going to go through this, pseudo debate, we kind of have it set up on different sections. We're kind of weighing each of the genres on. So, I mean, take us through what we're going to break it down with Double D.
All right. So, just to be clear before we get started, there was no attempt on our part to manipulate this to favor one side or the other. No attempt to stalemate, which is what I'm afraid is going to happen by the time we get through everything. This was literally just talking about how do we evaluate games ourselves and decide like what we like, basically. What do we like about games? What do we care about? And the first thing is the story. Now, some games you don't necessarily play for the story. But when we're talking about like role-playing games specifically and then MMOs and stuff, the story elements that are there, we can also maybe include in that a little bit the gameplay aspects about stuff of how the gameplay feeds into that for games that maybe are less story-driven per se. And along with that, our first experience with the game. I think if you've listened to our Mass Effect episode that we released recently, our memories and our nostalgia about that and how we feel about the entire franchise has a lot to do with our first experience playing through that and is a big part of how we determine what we like and don't like. And then along with that longevity of the games, both in terms of, replayability, how many times can you go through the same game? How long do you keep playing the same game? Those types of things. And then the community around the games. And this is not just the community you find, because we talked about this, it's not necessarily specifically social aspects, which would obviously be in favor of the MMOs, but a lot of games have strong communities around them and people that support them. Animal Crossing comes to mind, and even like Doom Eternal, like when that was releasing, those two communities got together and had some very positive interactions. And there's a lot of gaming communities that are very toxic when you have multiplayer. Toxic is even this term that I think has come into existence because of MMOs and multiplayer games and stuff. Looking at the profitability of both, we've seen some top-selling games in both categories. We'll look at that. And then finally, the sort of the technological achievements behind both and analyzing, if we can, a little bit, the technical difficulties and prowess that went into creating the games that we love.
I mean, to kind of start, I think you're already at a rough spot. Because we're going to talk story. I mean, RPGs, the whole basis is stories. You look at the big franchises, Legend of Zelda, Final Fantasy, Metal Gear Solid, I mean, nobody mentioned Mass Effect. The whole thing that gets you hooked is the story. I think over the last year or two, we've seen some big single player titles. The Last of Us, the Uncharted series, Ghost of Tsushima this past year, all single player, big time things. And the things you get hooked on is just that. It's you going through this epic tale. You get either pulled in by the individual character or the cast of characters. And I think Ghosts, and I haven't played Last of Us, but Ghost of Tsushima, I think is a perfect example of what narrative storytelling can do. And I mean, that game can get repetitive at times, like Assassin's Creed gets repetitive at times as far as the missions are kind of the same. But what I loved about Ghost was the individual stories between the actual residents on Tsushima and how they viewed the samurai and this inner struggle the main character had as well between taking more of a ninja and working in the shadows approach versus traditional samurai and facing your enemy head on. And then now he interacted with residents and some of those choices made and how this war ravaged individual villages and individuals themselves, I thought was so unique. And I think that's what made that game really stand out to where a game like Assassin's Creed, that repetition between missions, it kind of gets lost because the story, it's good, but I don't know, it doesn't work the same on me the same way. And then look at Last of Us. I haven't played it myself, but anybody that's played that game, from my understanding, it's just a tearjerker. It just boom. I mean, Spider-Man as well. Individual game, great story and a great take on one of the best characters of all time.
And this would seem like a clear win for you, if not for the fact that I think we need to be fair in our evaluations. By which I mean the story that's told by a single player game is a very carefully crafted novel, which it's an interactive novel you are journeying through, voice acting and these musical scores and everything. And so yeah, that's one way of defining and looking at story for sure. And I would even be willing to concede that single player games in general excel in that aspect more than multiplayer games. However, when you look at stories, you can also look at the stories that are told about games based on the player interactions, right? And in that respect, it goes beyond just the game itself. It's the moments outside the game. It's the Leroy Jenkins in Warcraft, right? Like, you're laughing. You know it. You're not even playing War. You've played it in the past, obviously. But
Mad Cow style is Leroy Jenkins.
So. Right. And that is a story that is told about World of Warcraft. That is a moment that has lived on well beyond when that actually happened. EVE Online with the massive battles that are coordinated by the players, they're not driven into this by the story that's being told by the game per se. It's the players themselves that are making this happen. I mean, you can even go, if you want to go for like some more esoteric sort of like far back stuff, right? There's Ultima Online 1997. During a beta test, the players managed to assassinate Lord British in the game, which was supposed to be impossible because he was supposed to be invulnerable, right? But the players coordinated. I guess it was this one guy, Reigns, cast a spell and due to a server restart, managed to kill it. And again, like, this is back in 97. And I think these moments, these stories, like when you reminisce about the gaming moments you had or sort of tell stories about your gaming experiences, I just want everyone listening to consider how many of those stories that you tell are moments that you experienced by yourself in a single player game, or how many of those are moments where you were with other people playing a game in a multiplayer environment and you're talking about some antic or something that happened with you guys. I think those are the stories that stay with you more than the ones told in very flashy novel fashion by single player games are the stories that are created by the players.
See, I mean, you're not wrong, but this is where I think the first experience comes into it. And I do think, generational differences come into play too. Because, Final Fantasy VII, probably my all-time favorite game. Love it. Final Fantasy franchise, great. But not every game, is going to be a favorite. Each one's significantly different, which is awesome. But Final Fantasy VII is a perfect example of, did you kind of achieve everything? Did you grind? Did you beat Emerald and Ruby weapon? Did you get everybody's ultimate limit break? Did you do all these little things that, unless you had the guidebook, you didn't really know they existed, or you kind of stumbled upon them, but it created this different experience. And yes, this is before multiplayer games and everything else, but it gave you bragging rights. And I think in that bragging rights, when you grew up on those types of games, it creates this difference then too, to where you are more drawn to the story and getting in there rather than, your first experience is a Leroy Jenkins. Everyone's playing it. Everyone's playing Call of Duty. So you want to hop in there and be involved in it. And that's great. That's fine. But quite frankly, you're not really gaming. Like the whole beauty of gaming is the fact that you're putting yourself into this experience. You're having this actual story. It's exactly what we geeked out about Mass Effect. And when you are drawn in, it has the same exact impact then of, sharing a Leroy Jenkins moment as it does in, World of Warcraft.
I mean, I really think in that respect, I have to disagree. One, because, right, like, not that every game needs to tell a story, but Tetris, one of the, if not the largest or the most sold game ever, what story is there? Right, like it's an absolute single player game for sure. I grant you that single player game that I'm bringing up, but like it's
They do
not
a multiplayer one now, so.
right. It's evolved. Which point to my side is the direction these games go is towards multiplayer.
Yeah, well, I'll get to that though too. Like I got some ammunition for you there. So.
But if we're talking first experiences, though, I don't know. You make kind of an interesting point in the terms of like, where does the experience come from, right? Like, is your experience based on something that's happening in the game, or because of the game, or because of the people you're with, and sort of that atmosphere? I don't know. I'm sort of processing this a little bit because it wasn't something I was expecting.
I think too, and I've gotten arguments with one of my good buddies out in Pittsburgh, Hayes, because he's a little bit younger. I'm sorry, he's what? I'm with 30, not 30s. He's 29, 30. But either way, big Call of Duty fan, FPS guy. And I always make the joke that RPG players are inherently better video game players than FPS people. It's just
whoa. Now, hang on.
And I get it. That's
better
a bit
video
of a
game
reach.
players based on what?
I think you pay more attention to what's going on because, again, if you grew up on just consoles and basically like Cuphead, you only get one shot. You only have a save. You have to grind out. I think you're aware of different things. Now, granted, if you only play,
you're moving into the punishing aspects of like, do you have infinite shields and life regen? And like, I will agree, there's definitely been a trend from like the 2000s to maybe 2010 of like just the players are these unkillable tanks, but we've definitely seen games coming back to where you're just fragile hitboxes. Dark Souls, those which you brought up.
But I mean, Dark Souls
Cuphead,
is a single player game, and it's that you enjoy the grind of it, and it's kind of this weird bragging rights where I think MMO and FPS. And before I kind of bash it, I will say we wouldn't be, having a podcast like this or being on, the upper echelon of pop culture without games like Call of Duty and FPS. They help bridge the gap between us being basement dwellers to everybody gaming out, and even the rise of female gamers as well, and then being able to be like, yeah, I'm a chick.
Scene, right? Like,
no, absolutely.
Like the idea that games could be sports comes a lot from those games, those genres.
My critique is that I think with people that do just go on FPS and are maybe just Call of Duty, aficionados, it's about just KDR and the idea of competition versus the actual beauty of the game and the idea that, hey, you went through the campaign or you did this. And what irks me then is we saw for a while a lot of good RPGs kind of get hindered by having to add this social component and this multiplayer component. We talked about it last time, Mass Effect. Mass Effect added the multiplayer because at that point in time, and this wasn't too long ago, all things considered, games wouldn't sell single player games unless they had a multiplayer. When they relaunched Tomb Raider and Square Enix relaunched that, phenomenal game. It had a multiplayer aspect. I don't think it needed it.
I never touched it. I've played the new series and I've enjoyed it quite a bit, but I've never touched the multiplayer.
But there was this fear a game wouldn't sell unless there's a multiplayer aspect to it. And I think that's where there's a bit of a generational gap then, because some of these games maybe didn't hit as well as they should have because you had to put time in the multiplayer component of that, where the multiplayer component wasn't as good. And some gamers didn't actually want to play the story in the campaign. So you had kind of this mesh between the two. And Tomb Raider is a great example of great story, but, did they have to waste time in the multiplayer? I don't know. Last of Us, the multiplayer, I don't get why it has it. Ghost, Perfect example though, adding a free multiplayer, a lot of fun, but it's essentially just the same maps, everything else in the game. Great that it's free, but should it be in there? But it does add longevity to the game. After you beat that story, unless you want a new game plus it and you enjoyed it, what's going to make you come back to it? And that is where I will say, yes, your MMOs have a great advantage over RPGs.
Yeah, and I will also say that I didn't realize how much I actually hated debating with you because you really just like to move between one point to another very fluidly. So it becomes very difficult to address your points in a direct fashion. You've gotten all the way down from story to first experience to longevity in like one
It's
little
how I roll,
conversation.
man. It's how I roll.
Yeah,
You know,
it's underhanded. I don't appreciate it, and I think our
I have
listeners don't appreciate it as well. They're going
I
to
have a
see your
future career in
shady
politics
tactics. You
after
tried
this, so.
to this like I'm not going to give you time to speak on it because I'm just going to keep moving on to the next one.
Exactly.
Very shady. No, I mean, so
Is it? I mean, yeah.
the
90s
story
politics,
stuff,
man. I just watch New Grimmage too much.
the story stuff, like I said, like I even agree that like the narratives told by single player games in general are stronger. I will point out that a lot of the biggest selling single player games, Tetris being the #1 selling game of all time, has no story. You know, Space Invaders has no real story behind it from one level to the next.
Whoa. Aliens coming in, invading your house.
That is the
okay?
entire story. That is the entire story.
You gotta defend.
It's
okay?
not. And if you don't want to, if you want to try to pretend that that is as deep as like the narrative going on in World of Warcraft, where you now need a freaking, you know, it's one. If it was ever written, you would need to have that like glossary in the back that like explains everything in detail, like who's this character, where they've been, what's this faction.
Going back to arcade cabinets like that, I think that's a whole different beast. I mean, gaming's evolved significantly since, you know, that and Atari.
I'm willing to accept this point because if we're going to accept that we're staying recent, then we're throwing out a lot of stuff I think that's in your favor in terms of like
I'm saying
top
if we
selling
stick
games,
with
grossing games and stuff like that are
if we're going
typically
to
those
start, I
games
think
that
we can
have
start with
arcade
consoles. And I think, you know, if we go with like Metroid, Legend of Zelda, and, you know, Mario, and still single player titles that have evolved, but and no disrespect to, you know, Konami and Atari and all the greats, it was a completely different style of gaming. You were going in
for sure,
and there was a social component to that though too, and there was that, hey, did you beat my highest score? You know, it could be something as simple as Pac-Man or 1941, and you're going in there and you're seeing initials on the game, and you're like, hey, I want to beat that, and you go in there. But then you're also watching folks come in, beat you, and then you have the fighting game component of that, which I do think we can get to in sense of community down in a little ways here. But the arcade culture stemmed a lot of this kind of, I don't want to say where everything kind of coexisted, but you did have the competition. Then you did have people that basically, where you want to argue about the foundation of WoW, the folks that played Gauntlet, I thought were weird as hell in the arcade. It was always like, you know, I was 8 or 9. It would be, you know, these teenagers, and they usually like looked way older than they were. They looked like they were like 45 and they're like 15. I'm like, these guys, they got like full grown beards and, you know, beer bellies and shit. I'm like, I don't know what the hell's going on.
Yeah.
But I thought it was weird. But then like I would always be driven towards, you know, X-Men, TMNT, or, you know, Tekken Tag, and of course Marvel vs. Capcom 2, which you know, step to the sticks, you want to get beat. But
I mean, so like I said, like, so the story elements, I'm just kind of pointing out the one hand that I don't know that story elements are present in every single player game. Not that they need to be necessarily, but just making that clear as well. And like I said, like when you talk about like gaming stories and stuff like that, like the stories that really get told when you're swapping stories with people aren't like, oh, you know, were you thrown by that twist ending? And like we just did this with Mass Effect and stuff like that. We obviously got into that, but you're talking about what happened with people, like what your experiences were with other people, your interactions with them. I think it comes down to us just fundamentally being social animals, that like that's our focus. And I really do think that comes down more on the side of MMOs, multiplayer games, even something like what you're talking about, like TMNT and stuff like that. Like a lot of those are, or today would be referred to as like couch co-op of like 2 to 4 players. That's still multiplayer, man. Like, you know what I mean? Like a single player is single player, and that's a very strict definition. I would maybe be willing to consider like co-op as not being single player, or as being single player in certain cases rather, like, because there's a lot of games where you add a second player, but it doesn't fundamentally change the game. But most games that are 4 or more players, like those characters interact in a way that's unique. That's not the same if
Sorry.
you just play by yourself.
I have a pigeon hawk that literally just landed outside my window. I haven't seen a pigeon hawk in like ages, so it
So
was
you're
cool.
just in awe about this. That's fine. You
Yeah,
focus on
no,
that
sorry.
hawk.
I knew
You
I was like
focus on that
drifting off,
hawk while I
but
move down my list then on this side of things. So first
yeah.
experiences
I'm
though.
sorry. I love nature. Okay, my bad.
No, it's totally cool to love nature as you talk about your your video game life. Your not life video. You know what I'm saying. But first experiences, I think you got to give that. You got to give that to MMOs. You've got to give that to multiplayer games, right? Because like there are people who will say that their sort of early formative gaming experiences, as you're talking about it, are defined by their late nights alone. I could only get on the computer after 10 o'clock because I couldn't take up the internet because it was all phone, right? Dial up back in those days was phone. So like you couldn't take up the internet, or you had to play offline, and it was defined by this sort of like solitary component. But I think for a lot of people, myself included, a lot of my like initial gaming experiences and the ones that I think really maybe kind of affected me in my life came from either sessions playing with friends and like doing things that way, and again being social and interactive, or I spent so much time on multiplayer games, right? Like Warcraft 3, tons of time invested in that game, and maybe it's the difference of like the core combat systems, or the core gameplay rather, is like with MMOs and stuff like that, it's more meant for repetitive sessions and like grinding and ongoing play and stuff like that. But I can't remember investing nearly as much time in a single player game that I've cumulatively invested in most of the multiplayer games that have stayed with me. You know what I mean? And so like I feel like in terms of first experiences and looking kind of to the impact that the games have had on my life, MMOs have had a much greater impact. Even though I've had some really phenomenal single player moments, MMOs are the ones that I'm going to have to give this to.
I mean, we're gonna disagree on that, but you did bring up a good point as far as dial up and everything else, because middle school, high school, Half Life was big, and I loved Half Life too. But I mean, I couldn't play online, so I had a lot of friends that played it, would rant and rave about how much fun it was. I think I played 2 or 3 games online, and it's always connection issues, and basically running around a map by myself, and people would be phasing in and out of walls. And I'm like, this is stupid. I mean, like, I'm not having any fun because I'm not really playing the game. And quite frankly, I didn't really get the stupid culture the two of like putting up sprays and doing stupid stuff. And then like I didn't play Halo either, so
So
I
you don't
missed kind
mean
of
these
that part.
days either.
So we're not like, to me, it was just weird because it was like, are we playing the game or not? You know what I mean? Like, I'm here to play a game, not run around and be like, look, I can put a spray up on a wall. But like, I get it was cheeky and it's fun, but you know, that tech gap I think does cause, the first initial reaction be like, yeah, no, I'd much rather play the campaign and enjoy the game. And I think it comes down to, why are you playing video games? Are you playing it as an escape, or are you playing it as a social kind of component? For me, and you've addressed this in a couple of shows, you know, I like to have the escape and turn my brain off and just, nerd out and vegetate a bit. And that's, I think, why I'm driven to RPGs, because yeah, sometimes I just want to be a hermit and not be bothered. And it's like I'd much rather live vicariously through Shepard or Laura Croft, or and we can get in the community component in a bit here. But for some games, it that's really turned me off though too. Was just how some of the people played the game, and you couldn't do certain things, especially with World of Warcraft.
When we're talking, because you're sort of, so I'm talking up the first experience point to myself. It's maybe not so clear, but in my scorecard, I've got story and first experience on my side for sure. But looking at the
Well, no,
longevity
I'm
of
sorry. I
games,
remember. All right, that's my part. Was you say you have story on your side though, but what
absolutely.
always irked me with StarCraft and World of Warcraft, and I hate to like throw Blizzard on the bus like this, but when I was in high school, I'd watch the trailers, I'd see the commercial, I'd even see the old PC case, and I'd be like, "Wow, this looks like super cool! Like, look at this like horde, and like this is dope, man. This is like okay, there's a lot of action going on here." And then the game was so drastically different graphics wise than the actual trailers. I was like, it's like false advertising. I was like, this is overhead view. Like, I'll just
I
play
mean,
Age
you're
of
looking at
Empires with
cinematics.
this.
Is that even a fair complaint? Basically, to say like,
I,
oh, the
I'm
game
just
doesn't
saying,
look like it's cinematics.
I think you deviate from that much, and it's like, yeah, and then you realize you start playing these games, you're not really following any of that story. You're just playing with people, and it's a loose thing. It's like Diablo. Like you're just going through, no one's really talking to anybody. You're just leveling up and grinding and getting items. It's, okay, yeah, again, like, why are we doing this? And for me, I'm just like, I want to know why we're attacking this, orc or whatever else. I would just because he's in the way, or is it like an actual villain? And like to me, maybe
Yeah,
that's just
you say that
because
like you
I
actually
want the story.
care when you're the guy who's like, oh, you're a vampire. Like, fuck you, I'm just gonna kill you. Like,
What?
I
No,
don't need to
listen,
know
I was
anything
because I was paying
besides the
attention to the
fact of that
story.
you're a
They took
vampire.
somebody from a village. They basically beat him up and was draining his blood. I'm like, this is a fellow mortal. I don't trust vampires. I've always been more of a werewolf and Balverine kind of guy myself. You know what I mean? But
Vampires and AI. So like
yeah,
you're just
exactly. So
it doesn't matter what the
following the
actual in-game
story, I was
story
just
is. You're
like, they
just
told me
not
to
gonna get
rescue
behind
this
those.
guy. I have a choice to either like not rescue him and start with the vampires, or do the job I came here to do, which was save this guy. I went the whole 9 yards and wasted the vampires saving him. I didn't know it was gonna bite me in the ass and in the back end of things. But things happen. What you gonna do?
Well, look. So let me put this to you this way. This is, I think, the best way I can make my next point. How often do you go back and replay these games?
Quite often. I think it's because maybe I'm a masochist or I'm just a
Really,
bit of a
you go be honest with me. How often do you really go back, crack open your
dude.
old
I
Zeldas, crack open your old Final Fantasies? 7, I'm
I've
sure you
replayed
do.
Final Fantasy 7. I don't know, Christ. I mean, I didn't beat it until I was 25. I would play it up
God.
until the end, and I could never bring myself to beat it because I enjoyed it that much. And
So what? You
I
just blue
think
balled yourself? You're just like, you
pretty
get
much,
right
yeah,
there.
I
You're
did.
just
A
like, I'm not gonna
masochist with
finish it.
the gaming, yeah.
Jesus
But
Christ.
there was a good component though too. When I just had the 360 though, just life circumstances, finished up school and whatnot too. I wasn't buying new games. Like I'm buying more games now because I have more time and flexibility and whatnot too. But I do go back and replay games. I enjoy it. I like going through New Game Plus. The Batman Arkham series, I've replayed each of those at least twice. Metal Gear Solid, I've replayed through probably a dozen times. I absolutely love that. Metal Gear Solid 5 is, I think, is a great example of single player game with great replayability. And granted, it does have the online component, and you can kind of share stats and resources with fellow players. But yeah, it's one of those things you just enjoyed the world and you go back and you revisit it. So I mean, I do replay often. I don't if I like the game, I'm not trading it in. And even now, it's like replaying through Final Fantasy VII Remake. Probably will platinum that. I'm excited to have the DLC with Spider-Man. I plan on replaying through Ghost, replay God of War as well on New Game Plus. And I'm probably not going to trade those games in because I know there's going to be a point to want to go back and replay that. And if it is a franchise I love, like Mass Effect, I will go back to the original and replay before I play the next one if it's been a significant amount of time.
Yeah.
But a big part of that though too is even now, like I don't just constantly buy new games. If it's a game I like, sure, I'll buy it. But I'm not somebody that's always going out to find the new release of something.
That's very
So I think that's a
interesting.
component.
For a lot of reasons, because like I was obviously expecting you to not say you replayed so much, but what I'm rather gathering here is you're just broke, and that's you kind of work with what you got. But
yeah, you can make that fair case there, but
at
no,
least
I mean
for
Fable
me,
though too.
go ahead.
Sorry, no, Fable I replayed through a bunch of times too, and it was just one of those things. And like FIFA's and sports games, I buy each new year kind of thing though too. But
Oh God, why?
so I mean, I
What
love
money
FIFA.
grabs? Really, FIFA's the example you're going to use on that too?
Listen, all right, I'm not going to buy a new FIFA for a while, and this is a very sad point because my team, Livorno, it's a small Tuscan club in Italy. They've been demoted the last 3 seasons, and we're actually going to get demoted again because we're in last place in Serie C, the third tier of Italian soccer. We're in last place. We're
Jesus, dude.
absolutely pathetic. The last FIFA had them in Serie B, so I'm like, it's the only way I can play with my actual team. Since there's really no future for them to be back in
You
FIFA
really just
anytime
can't find
soon.
the second team somewhere that you could be like
I play with
happy with.
Lazio. I will play with Lazio in Serie A, but it's not quite the same if you can't really play with your actual team. Just so it's kind of sad.
Whatever. I mean, but it's interesting kind of what you're bringing up because like going into sort of like the longevity of a game, replayability of the game, I think is a big factor of that. How much do you go back and replay it? And like speaking for myself, obviously, I don't go back to games that often, right? Like some games I do. if I have specific things that I want to accomplish, like either achievements or storylines I want to see differently, so things that have like alternate endings and stuff that I might want to pursue, those I will. But usually my gaming is more like these MMO games interspersed with single player experiences. You know what I mean? Like on a typical evening, like weeknight or whatever, I'm much more likely to be playing a round of League of Legends or doing a dungeon in World of Warcraft, or you know what I mean? Like some sort of MMO thing is the bulk of my gaming is what's spent on that stuff. And it's not that I don't like single player games. Like, just to be very clear too, as we're having this debate, like I don't actually dislike single player games at all. I'm just
I think
arguing
both
that
of us play both.
yeah,
Yeah.
I'm just arguing that I think MMOs are generally the more superior format for, you know, the reasons we're going over now, and I think most gamers are going to agree with me that it's the social stuff, man. It's the social interactions. You know what I mean? Like jumping into a game of like let's just use Mass Effect, which we both love. You know, no one can question the fact that we were both down with that. I jump into that. I'm clearly not trying to socialize or talk to anybody or any, like even my girlfriend can just like go disappear at that moment because I'm just wanting to focus on that game. And that's cool if that's the experience you want, but most of the time what I want is to talk to people. I want to, you know, in the context of a game, we'll get in and like, yeah, we'll be running a dungeon, but we're having conversation. How's your life? How you been? What you up to? Like, da-da-da. It goes beyond just the game for me. And like when you're talking longevity, the other thing that needs to be mentioned, not just replayability and the amount of time spent on the games, but also how much you can get like new experiences, how much the game is supported. Because a lot of single player games drop. There might be DLCs for the first like year or two, whatever. After that, it's done. You know what I mean? Like it's a complete, it's a whole experience and it's done and over with. And like, yeah, the game's still there for you to play it, sure, but it's not going to be changing in any way. Where when you talk about multiplayer games, they see content updates, they see patches, they see, you know, dev updates and tweets and stuff, and you get new systems involved, and you know, the game can look very different today than it did back then, to the point now you have retail World of Warcraft and classic World of Warcraft as two separate officially supported versions of the game, because the original classic version and what we have today are such different animals compared to each other.
Yeah.
They provide a different experience. And if you have been playing along that entire time, you're still playing the same game, same basic concepts and mechanics are at play in this, obviously, but your experience has changed completely. And that's definitely got to be a point for MMOs in terms of the longevity of a game.
Now, longevity, I definitely agree with. I mean, look at Overwatch. It's been out for what, 5 years, and all they've done is patches and added what, maybe half dozen heroes. And I mean, WoW is a perfect example of that too. But I think that is a difference though too. It's a sensual. I think we see a lot of folks that do go through RPGs though and just kind of blaze through it and speed play. And for me, you know, I think this past year is probably the fastest I've gone through games with the pandemic and just wanting more time to you know, disconnect from what the hell's going on. But it would take me usually, you know, a month, 2 months, 3 months to beat a game. So like for me with a single player game, it's like, yeah, I'm not grinding through all that fast. Do you know what I mean? And I might go and play some Overwatch or an FPS to kind of like, you know, have some fun and change the pace like a FIFA and play against people online in that sense. But I think what we do see, and again, it's depending on the type of gamer you are. If you are just kind of blazing through a game just to beat it, and I think a lot of gamers do that, you're kind of doing yourself a disservice though too. And I think that's why you have some games with the multiplayer aspect to kind of keep them hooked, or you return for DLC. For me, it's again, if I like the game, the story, it's the challenge. But to your point though, with MMOs and you know evolving, for me, what drives me crazy then is it comes back to the community component of this then. Because Call of Duty, how often do you go into a lobby and you got a kid, 14-year-old kid, either A talking shit or just being obnoxious, or you know, you have, you know, the fellow 30-year-old gaming and you got a kid crying in the background, or you know, the freaking Baba Ganoush you know, douchebag that's got a shitty ass connection and it just sounds like fucking Megatron on the mic.
What does that even
You know?
mean, Baba Ganoush douchebag? I don't even know what that's supposed to mean. I mean, look, I want to address this head on, right? There are definitely shitty people in the world, and there are definitely shitty people who play video games. it's just, it is what it is, right? Like, you're not going to have purely good people who share your interests, who share your hobbies. And I don't care what your hobby is. If it's video games, if it's cycling, if it's, playing basketball on the weekends, right? Like, there are people who are going to be positive influences in that community who are going to contribute positively, and people who are just going to be basically assholes and douchebags. I don't think this is by which I mean, like, I don't think this is a fair criticism to make of like MMOs, essentially, because like you have the same crappy people playing single player games. I guess what your point is, like, you don't have to deal with them though because you're by yourself, so like you only have to deal with your own shitty consequences.
My point is, it takes away from the experience of the actual game if you have those types of people in a lobby. And then, if you're hopping out of lobbies or you have people modding and whatnot too, it takes away from the game experience. And depending on your schedule, and again, for me, in my schedule, and being as busy as I have previously been, again, this year, kind of dedicating more time towards gaming because everything else going on. But I may only have an hour or two to play games, and I don't want to sit there. You don't want it ruined
by someone who's memeing or whatever. Yeah,
exactly. So for me, it's like, like I don't want to have to turn everybody. I don't want to have to sit there and spend the first minute of going to Call of Duty session muting everybody because they're fucking jackasses. Like, that annoys me. Now with my boards and party chat, different story. And you always have somebody that might have like a shitty mic or wonky connection, but it's your boys. You don't mind that. World of Warcraft, when I played that, it irked me because I couldn't play like my character. I was a night elf, blood elf. Night elf warrior, and I wanted to dual wield because I'm like, all right, I got a class that can dual wield. I want to dual wield. I mean, everybody wanted me to be a tank, and I did have a badass shield. I didn't mind on certain raids, but it's like, okay, guys, like I'm taking all the damage. Now you guys are just taking all the good items though too. So like, fuck, like we got through this shit because of me, and then I'm not even playing. So then when I did start just dual wielding, being like, fuck you guys, I paid money to play this game, I'm gonna do it my way. People like took that as like me being an asshole, and I couldn't get into certain guilds because of my name, and I was just like, this is ridiculous.
Oh, what was your name? Remind me.
Oh yeah, all right. So I'm making a judgment call if we cut this or not, because I'm not sure how this paints me in a good light or not. But I did play WoW when I was younger. I was 19, 20, so I was maybe 18, 19.
The age where you should know better, but still
whatever,
naive enough to.
I was still a punk teenager,
right?
But I played with my older brother and one of his buddies, and my name was Balls Deep. And
well, wasn't Nick's character Doozer?
yeah. And my brother's character was Doozer. He had like a level 70 Paladin and level 70 I think a level 70 Rogue too. But I did like the community and like the group chat, and you can go into a town, and I'd always be like, Balls Deep has finally returned, and like go to the auction house and start dancing and being a stupid ass. And people got mad about that and would challenge me to duels. So I'd be like, this is crazy. Like, I'm just being a jackass, sure, but like, how is that? Like, there's so much stuff going through the chat. Like, how is that bothering you? You know what I mean? So it's just like, whatever. But people just didn't like me dancing in the auction house because I wasn't taking it.
So after your entire conversation about like toxic players, you only got a limited amount of time to play. The person you were,
yes, I was back in.
I really feel like a lot of your gaming experiences are your own fault.
I don't think. Listen, I don't think what I was doing was all that crazy, because it's like, how much are you paying attention to a dude dancing in the auction house? You know what I mean?
I mean, were you stripping? Were you at least getting tipped for it?
No, but
then you made a mistake. You roll a female Nelf, and you start getting tipped for your services.
Well, I ended up getting banned because of my name. Someone reported me, which irked me. But my brother and I would also people would challenge me to duels. So then, of course, like I'd get like one shotted, and then my brother would immediately challenge them, and then like he'd whoop their ass because he's like level 70. And then I would dance around and be like, you got noobed. I don't think people like that I would be like, you got noobed.
You were the dude. Whooped. You were the exact dude that you're complaining about. This is hilarious. So you're going to sit here and be like, oh, like people, like I only got limited time to play. I'm a grown adult. I don't have time for all these shenanigans. And people just like memeing and throwing things away and just like intentionally like dying. And
but it irked me because with like, raids, like people like, people. But this what irked me though was like, okay, aside from me being a jackass in this stuff, was like with raids, they're like, oh, you're a warrior, you should tank, like you have to tank, and like people like wouldn't let me play a certain way. Then I can also dual wield, and that's what bothered me. Like, yes, my antics are stupid and whatnot, and like got me banned. I came back with a balls deeper was the second name.
Balls deeper.
And one guy said like I couldn't get into a guild because my name, and he was just like, it has to be like your name has to mean something like a way of life or like, and I'm like, balls deep is a way of life, dude. Like,
Okay, well that's a stupid reason not to let someone into
yeah,
like
that's what I'm
I would
saying.
take
And
issue of
like,
like, hey, we're family friendly guild and your name's not
but
family friendly.
that's what bothered me though, because it was just like, so you're getting mad at me because like I don't have a Greek mythology name, and you are way more into the lore than like I am, and I'm just trying to have some fun and like yes, be a jackass with the game, but like at the end of the day, it's like, yeah, just do a raid, kick some ass, and like drop some stuff. And like I had more fun playing as a rogue. I named Taint Smasher, but maybe that was because the rogue is a bit more versatile, and people were like, yeah, cool, like you don't have to be in a role. But between the guild nonsense and the fact people were like, you have to play this way, for me, I felt like that was toxic. And yes, me being douchey with like, you got noobed and making fun of the culture a bit. Sure, that, shame on me, teenager, should have known better, perhaps, whatever. But I think the fact that you're paying to play a game and you're asking people then to play a certain role, and you have people that purposely picked, a paladin or a class that is, you know, significantly better than other classes, and then it's like you're trying to dictate everybody else should play. I think you're more of the asshole than me being a bit of tongue in cheek with the culture of the game.
Well, so how do I phrase this? I will give you part of your point I maybe agree with, but obviously not all of it. And so what I'll say is kind of this is like, I definitely feel the pain of two things of basically not being able to play the game the way you want to play and people sort of ruining your game experience. Because even if the vast majority of player interactions, let's just say, right, like you play League of Legends, you got 10 people in there, you got a team of 5. World of Warcraft, you're doing dungeons with 5 people or raiding with 10 or more people, right? Like 90% of those people can either be like neutral in terms of their interactions with you, like they're you don't have good or bad experiences. Maybe somebody's a good experience for you, whatever. They're helping you out, they're ganking your lane and or whatever you want. Like they're doing something that's positive for your experience. I will say one point that I'm willing to give you is that like one bad apple, so to speak, can really spoil the bunch, right? Like one asshole player can completely control sort of your experience in that game or that round basically until you get to the next one. Even if, the other 3 people you're with are totally chill and fine and maybe even good dudes, that one asshole is the one that's going to sort of color your entire experience with that game. I do get that, right?
And I went on, I don't know, probably at least a dozen raids. And what irked me is that through a dozen, maybe 1 or 2 runs. And it was another rogue I used to play with. I forget his name. But and the community aspect, I did make friends on WoW, which was cool. I thought that was super cool. And I think, yeah, it's cool to have like 1,000 people in a city, like all over the world. Like that's insane to me.
Yeah.
But that's also irked me that with me dancing in an auction house, like bothered people. It's like, dude, there's so much shit going on. Like how is this bothering you? And like some people would get around and dance and join in with like you got noob stuff, which was cool. So like you did have other people that got it, but then the other ones took it so serious. It's like, guys, like there's a whole world out there. Like you play this to escape from reality and like be stupid. But my point with the raids, only once or twice I have somebody that like wait and be like, yeah, no, like make sure you get this gear. And that to me, I think was the biggest thing was that people were just selfish in their own sense and of like, they still wanted to grab, even they had better quality gear. They wanted to grab it so they could sell it at the auction house. And it's like, what the fuck? Like you guys are just being assholes.
I mean, and so I know, I also understand a lot of the pain you're describing right now because you're just using World of Warcraft as sort of the point of comparison here a little bit. I've raided as a restoration druid through, I want to say like 3 or 4 expansions or whatever. And this expansion I swapped to a priest. And the reason I did that was because typically druids, they have a tank spec, they have a melee DPS spec, they have a range DPS spec, and then the healing spec, obviously. And because they had so many different ways that they could be played, it was very common that I would be asked to move into one of those other roles, or like, hey, like it would be helpful for the team if you would be good at also doing this or that in addition to healing. And then that also turned into very quickly like, hey, if I cared about my team and I did become good at that, well, then I also became the first person who didn't get to heal because now I've become competent at a different role, right? Like now I'm good at doing damage. So if we don't need a healer, you're the best damage dealer we have, so let's swap you over and stuff. And so the better I got at doing at my character, the less I got to do what I wanted, basically. And disc priests are much more simple. They have 2 healing specs, 1 DPS spec, and you know what I mean? Like the expectation I'm hoping will be less of like we want you to not heal because that's what I want to do. I want to heal. You know what I mean? And that is a certain degree of selfishness. But I think this kind of comes back to the point that I want to make.
Role though too, so that's like the least selfish role to
I mean,
want to play.
yeah, it is, and it's just one of those things that for any guild or group, right? Like when you're talking World of Warcraft, there's a balance. Overwatch, there's a balance. League of Legends, there's a balance of like you need a certain balance between who's a striker, who's a defender, who's a healer, who's a supporter, who's a buffer, who's a damage dealer. Like it depends on the game, the context. But there is a balance between the team there, and having people who are able to sort of move between those different roles and fill them effectively is good for the team. And I just think it's part of having a good attitude. But again, like it comes back to that issue of talking about like not getting to play the way you might want to play. So I really do understand a lot of where you're coming from with this stuff. But like I guess there's 2 main points here when we talk about community that I do want to make in response to that. The first one is your attitude in defense of your actions, I think, brings up an interesting gray area. No, I'm not trying to put you down. I actually kind of agree with what you're saying of like it's a game, we're here to escape, and like, me dancing around the auction house or whatever. Like, does this really affect you in a significant enough way that you should be reacting as much as you are, right? And it brings up this gray area where I think a lot of player interactions, a lot of things that we consider toxic or negative behaviors and stuff, it's like, well, how much is it that this is objectively just like a bad thing that they're doing, and how much is this you like letting this bother you essentially? Like they're just doing whatever they're doing and having fun, and like, yeah, this might not be what you're trying to do or what you're expecting, but like, is this really that bad, or is this you letting it get to you? You know what I mean? And I think perspective plays a lot into that, because a lot of times I think there's an idea that basically like if someone's not pursuing the same goal or objective I am, then what they're doing is wrong. Whether your objective is just to chill and have fun and do like meme builds, or you want to put on, you just want to try something that's out there. Maybe you're just testing a build or something in a multiplayer game, and then someone looks at you and they're like, well, why are you doing that shit when this is the established meta? This is what everyone else is doing. You know what I mean? You're like, it's not even that you're trying to ruin their time or hurt their chances of winning, but you legitimately want to experiment with something. You know what I mean? And I wonder how many of these interactions that we consider to be negative come from this sort of, ultimately, we're just not being considerate of other people's views and their experiences and their perspectives. And then the other part with that is like, when we're talking about community, right? I think we have to mention how these gaming communities grow beyond just the game. You form friendships, they might start in the game. That's where it begins, but you either see them in person, you might never see them in person, but you talk to them, you have a real connection with them. They might provide support or comfort in times of need, especially like in the pandemic here with mental health issues and stuff like that, and just like general loneliness people I think are experiencing. Relationships come out of this. We have online dating now. Like the whole like idea that the virtual world is completely divorced and not a part of the real world. I think those lines are blurring to begin with. And when it comes to games and communities, MMOs really do start blending that like line between your real world and individual experiences and your virtual experiences, and what it means to just be friends and stuff. Like, do you ever have to meet someone in person? Do you have to see their face? Can you still be someone's friend? I would argue you could. You know what I mean? Like, you could still be friends with somebody even in those situations.
No, I mean, you bring up a good point with that. I mean, even Animal Crossing, I mean, in pandemic sense, I'm sure there's people that get a sense of community from that. Friendships, I mean, weddings were held and everything else this past year with that, which is like crazy. And I always thought that was cool, especially with WoW and MMOs in general, because it's like, the Guild does a great job of the show with Felicia Day. Was the web series back in the day. I think it's on Netflix now. But
I remember
does a great job of, humorously kind of portraying that. But that was cool. And it's like, yeah, you can form a kinship through video games. With, RPGs, my personal preference, it's more so kind of like liking a sports team. You have your community that is also fans of it, and you see someone wearing a shirt or a reference to it, and it's like, yo, like that's my dude. But that's it. You're not going to know if they're a fan or not until you start talking to them or they're wearing it on their sleeves. And it is a bit more of, fraternity in that sense, unless it's a super popular game like Mass Effect or, Elder Scrolls games. Well, you know,
Yeah,
there's
yeah.
an Elder Scrolls MMO now, but
Yep.
it is a bit more, well, it's more inclusive on your side of things for sure, because there's just more people coming in. But you don't have as much, I think, toxic memories though on the other side of things because you do have that fraternity and it's a bit more close knit than if you are a fan of the game and all you're talking about is shared experiences or that slight competitiveness of, oh, did you do this? Did you play this DLC? Or did you unlock this?
That's true. And because like when you bring up the competitive aspects of stuff, like it's maybe an issue exacerbated by multiplayer games that because people are competitive to begin with, sometimes the way you win is just by dragging other people down. You know what I mean? Like you could just be better. You could also just make them worse, if that makes sense, right? Like I think a simple example of that is Rocket League. You're driving cars around. I don't know if you know, for people who might not have played, but you're driving
Yeah.
cars, right? And you could either just be better and score a great aerial goal that they can't block, they can't get to it, whatever. That's one way to win. Or you can just demo them, right? Like you can literally just drive through, blow up their car, and now they have an open goal and you can put it in. And does that make you a better player? Probably not. You know what I mean? Like you didn't really demonstrate any like real skill or anything per se there. And really what you're just kind of doing is dragging them down by like not letting them play the game because you demoed them, you destroyed them. But that's how you're winning. And I think there's other games that you can look at similarly that like the strategy, so to speak, is to drag other people down is one viable way of winning more than just actually excelling. So like I
See,
would
I don't know
agree.
enough about Rocket League to weigh in on that because I haven't played. But to that point, though, I mean, even with Overwatch culture, Diva is one of my mains tank wise. Reinhardt was before, but the mobility with Diva is why I kind of switched. And I joke with the Mad Cow style because that's gamer tag. Usually run and gun. I'm always a dual wielder maniac, and like I'd play more damage probably if I could actually, wasn't 10-minute wait time or, I could trust other tanks. But my point with Diva is yeah, I play very loose with her. And, if I play with my buddies Jay, he plays wrecking balls. So we go no shield tanks. And I think we've lost in maybe 30 games played, 2 out of that bunch. And it wasn't even like we got dominated. It was very close, like overtime matches. But talking with other friends that play Overwatch is like, oh, you're leaving healers out to dry. And like, I'm immediately pissed off. And it's like, we're still winning the game. Like, we're pushing the lines. Like, we are dominating. And yes, it's atypical and you're not supposed to play that kind of way. But we're not just running and gunning. Like, we still retreat to the point if we need to and just, create a flurry and make a bit of chaos. But it's so, again, like, you're not supposed to play that way. You should have a shield tank. It's crazy. And what does irk me with Overwatch too is people will be like, oh, we need somebody to play this. We need something, but no one else changes their roles. They still stick with whoever they're good with and then demand somebody else pick. And it's like, just stop it. Like, let everybody play with their mains, their favorites. And, if you're skilled enough, you win the goddamn game. Half the time in Overwatch, people don't even stay on the goddamn objective, which drives me crazy. So it's like, why are you shouting out orders if you're worried about your KDR in the first place?
Yeah. And so like I said, like I guess in one sense with the community stuff, I agree with you. And that sense is specifically the idea that if I had to look at most interactions, in the case where a community grows up around the single player game, like we've seen like with Animal Crossing, I think Minecraft, Terraria are great examples. Minecraft is probably multiplayer if I think about it though, Terraria as well. But um
I actually like Terraria better.
do you?
Yeah.
Good to know. But like Animal Crossing being an example, even like Ghosts, Dark Souls, there's much more of a sense of like, let's be helpful to each other, right? Because there's not a competition really in terms of things. So like, here's a cool thing that I figured out, or here's an interesting way to do this, or here's a guide for XYZ kind of thing. Like, there's a lot more, I think, just like positive interactions in those single player communities because it's not necessarily a competition compared to multiplayer games. At the same time, I just think there's a lot less interaction in general. You know what I mean? And I guess kind of for me, this sort of boils down to the fact of like, yeah, there are assholes in games, in life, just period. It exists. I admit it. But most people, I think,
Yeah.
are good people. And if I can get on my high horse for a second here, I think one of the issues maybe with modern gaming culture and multiplayer games in particular is this sort of like expectation that people play the way we want them to play. Because you've mentioned that a lot. I've mentioned this even. And it's very much like we judge people based on our own value system essentially, and if they're not pursuing what we are pursuing, if they're not going after the same objective, then they're wrong, and then that's toxic gameplay. You know what I mean? Like I want to win, and the way I win is by being meta. I follow the meta. I do what is the generally accepted strategy. That's how I win games. That's my strategy. And then someone else can come in and be like, I win by focusing on one character and being good at that character. You know, I play Diva. It might not be the most meta tank and stuff like that, but like I play that character, I know that character, and I win games because I have devoted time to becoming very good at that character. You know, and then is there really anyone who's wrong with that in that situation? Is the person who's saying like the way to win is to follow the general strategy, the meta, especially when you're dealing with people you don't know in a situation where like you're plugging in and not playing with friends, and like, hey, if we all agree to a certain strategy that we can all play around, there's certain givens here, then like we don't need to have that level of communication. That say on the flip side, you might be playing against people who are 2 or 3 or 4 people who all know each other on Discord, on a call, talking to each other. How do you compete against that? You almost can't if you don't at least have some sort of baseline understanding of this is the strategy for this game, aka the meta. And then,
It's kind
you
of
know, you
sorry.
being, I'm going to be great at this one character. Who's wrong? No one's wrong in that situation, but I'm going to guarantee both of you walk away from the interaction feeling like the other person was feeling negatively about the interaction, feeling like the other person was, you know, part of the problem or, you know, a negative person in the community when, you know, you're just looking at it through your own perspectives.
Kind of coming into profitability too. I mean, two kind of games we're talking about. I mean, Blizzard, I think your point with the meta, it's kind of funny to me because the pragmatism is more prevalent in Call of Duty, where yes, KDR is the end all be all, but you know, even if you have a guy that goes over, 20 and you win, it's like, yeah, whatever, we won. It's about wins and losses in COD. But then in a games like Overwatch and WoW, though, there isn't that same pragmatism. It's really play with your roles. And I think that's kind of interesting because Blizzard has a bunch of popular games. Call of Duty is one of the most popular console games. I don't play League. I don't have PCs. I don't quite know the culture of League of Legends and where it falls between the two. But I do think it's kind of interesting that how much is it about winning the game and the idea of then how you won, and is that disrespectful to the game? For me, and maybe just you know being athletic most of my life, it kind of comes down to white man can't jump. You either want to look good and lose, or you want to look bad and win. Me, if I'm playing a game like that in competition, like Overwatch, I want to win. I don't care how many fucking deaths I got. Like we won, we won, and it's objective based game, so it doesn't matter how pretty it is. If you got that W, that's what's up.
Why don't we move into the profitability thing a little bit? Cause just because you brought it up, and I'm thinking we should just continue forward a little bit with this. I know I'm gonna shoot this argument down before you even try this argument with me. Long-term sales do favor single player games. If you look at all-time sales, right? Just because we didn't have the technology for multiplayer games. Like, let's be very clear. Multiplayer games, beyond maybe having 2 people at most, was not that achievable for the majority of the life that video games have existed since like the 80s and stuff like that, right? Like Tetris is older than me, #1 selling video game franchise of all time. It's got 33 years. That's not a look at the average gamer. It's not a look at the current trends in the industry, not at all. So I'm going to take a moment. Let's look at some of the top selling games, specifically last year in 2020, because we do have those numbers. And let's see where things are going. I can cite my sources if this is of interest to anybody, but looking at VentureBeat reported by the NPD group, Call of Duty Black Ops, top selling game of 2020, followed by Call of Duty Modern Warfare, both multiplayer games. Of the top 20 games I'm looking right now, let's say Animal Crossing is single player, Assassin's Creed is single player, Ghosts, Final Fantasy Remake, sure, Spider-Man. I'm trying to be
Single player games.
Yeah, I'm trying to be generous. I'm looking at a top 20 list, and so far I've pulled up 5 games that I would consider single player games. Cyberpunk sneaks on there. 6. So like just looking at the list here, right? Of the top 20 selling games of 2020, less than half of them are single player games. Right? And the top 2 spots are dominated. The top 5 spots really are dominated by multiplayer. Call of Duty, Black Ops, Call of Duty Modern Warfare, Madden, NFL 21. Those pop in 1, 2, 3, and 4 right there. You got Animal Crossing, New Horizons sneaks in there a little bit, and Assassin's Creed Valhalla coming in at 5th place. And if you look at the Steam sales, it's the same thing. The top selling Steam games of 2020, you've got Cyberpunk at number 1, Fall Guys multiplayer, PlayerUnknown multiplayer, Counter-Strike multiplayer, Monster Hunter World multiplayer, Rainbow Siege multiplayer, Grand Theft, although I do hear it has a very good single player. Let's be honest, that game is based on its open world multiplayer these days. Doom Eternal, single player. Destiny, multiplayer. Dota, multiplayer. I mean, Red Dead 2 comes on that list, and then Among Us, multiplayer again. It's multiplayer games take the spots no matter what you look at. Profitability, it's got to be multiplayer games.
Yeah, I mean, I can't really argue with you there, especially right now. Over long term,
all right, and
yes,
we're just going to end the podcast there. It was good seeing you all tuning in. Thank you.
So, I mean, yes, if you count like Legend of Zelda, Super Mario, even Mario Kart, but Mario Kart you could argue is MMO as well. Yes, you have to go back and count the franchise as far as best selling. GTA and Red Dead both, I mean, they're on those lists because of the multiplayer component. So I don't have much there. I mean, to see games like Ghost and Final Fantasy last year go on there, it is big because I do think we're seeing a resurgence of single player games right now. I do think there is more interest for that. I think when you see games like Last of Us have such an impact and people coming back to kind of play that, I think there is a bit of a focus on storytelling right now. And with so many people becoming gamers, and this is where it kind of comes back to that point with we wouldn't be, in a position culturally speaking as nerds and gamers without Call of Duty and FPS. But since so many people are playing MMOs and the exposure and the comfort level is there, I think more people are picking up on games like Last of Us, Final Fantasy VII Remake, Ghost of Tsushima, God of War, that this medium is on par with movies and cinematics and entertainment to where you can, even Breath of the Wild, just fall in love and immerse yourself in an experience. And we all play video games for an escape and some form of entertainment. So I think the more people are playing games, I think there's going to be a stronger increase then towards single player. I mean, even Cyberpunk is essentially just single player. And to be that big of selling, it's the idea that you can be in this massive world and do whatever the fuck you want. And there's no lore to that, even if it is just you. And I could make a case possibly even with streaming to watch people just play individual games and watch their experiences. Now, I don't know what the numbers are as far as how popular those streams are versus people that play Fortnite or MMOs, but I do think we're seeing a bit more of a turn in that to where some streamers can have success just playing their individual games and having an audience and community in that sense. But I think one thing we can agree on profitability wise, I'm glad to see Fortnite was not on there at all. And Fortnite is arguably the worst game I've ever seen. I mean, the free to play component is also, I think, that exposure element to where you're exposed to a game, exposed to a community. You might be then looking at games from a different vantage point. I think Animal Crossing is a great example of that. I know a lot of folks that don't consider themselves gamers dove in, head first during the pandemic with that, looking at other games. And it's like, yeah, I want to go play Genshin Impact. I want to go check out, Super Smash Brothers. And just, yes, these are just kind of random titles, but games they weren't really have played before. So it's like, you have that gateway because of MMO. I think that bodes well for, the hermit lifestyle with single player games. Where that leads, I don't know, but to have games like Death Stranding come out And yes, maybe wasn't as well received as people hoped, or even Cyberpunk, though. I think it shows a massive interest towards the medium and the storytelling capabilities of this. How much can you immerse yourself and fall in love with this kind of universe and kind of fill the void of, I think, movies and idea of streaming? And it's a different version of being couch potato.
It's a very interesting look at the role video games is playing in our society, and maybe how that's changing recently, and especially with the pandemic stuff in terms of the media that we consume. I will say this, like, by the hard numbers recently, and I do, let's be clear, I have to limit myself to like recent numbers of the past like couple of years, basically, because if we do look at all-time numbers, single player games top out by a massive margin.
Yeah.
The highest grossing video game franchise of all time is the Pokemon franchise, which, yeah, trading and battling is, a big part of that, but the games themselves are ultimately designed to single player experiences. You know what I mean? And that would be, again, in their favor. So I really
You're
do.
talking decades of games. So it's like, yeah,
Right.
it's
And
not
then
exactly fair.
well, it comes down to kind of like what someone listening might think about that, right? Because we're going to talk about profitability of games, single player versus multiplayer. Is it fair to only look back 1 year or 5 years or 10 years? Like, where do you draw the line? Because I personally think there should be a line drawn. Where you put that line, I think, is going to depend on different people. And I will say the other thing is I feel like single player games are learning to be more profitable in terms of optional DLC, character outfits, and stuff. Like, we've seen a lot of this already, I think, in multiplayer stuff. Because it was a bit of a flex to show off, like, hey, I got this cool gear, I got this cool skin for my character, da 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 da. I don't think people had interest in that maybe previously. We're starting to see some of that come over to the single player side of things. I don't know if that's good or bad necessarily. I mean, I personally would rather them leave things open to like mods and like let modders go crazy, and then get your Thomas the Tank dragons in Skyrim. Like, that's phenomenal. I think the other issue that single player games are facing is the cost to make single player games is dramatically higher than the cost for multiplayer games. Because this comes back to the story point. Like, even if I were to give you the story point and just say, like, yes, single player games have better story. And frankly, I think a lot of people will agree with you, because you kind of have to buy my argument that story encompasses non-game elements, because I didn't even try to argue that the stories told in multiplayer games are on par with the stories told in single player games. Even if I give you single player stories, the amount of cost that goes into developing most single player games, especially like a AAA title, is phenomenal. You have to pay for voice actors to record lines. You're typically dealing with like very high-end graphics and rendering and stuff, expensive studios with that. You're dealing with musical scores and compositions. You're dealing with script writing for all these alternate characters and storylines and everything that you're dealing with, and how these fit together to make sure they do fit together and make sense depending on if you go this way or that way. Like, there's just a lot more cost involved in developing a what we would consider like a AAA, like a high priced, fully developed single player game. Not that every game needs to be that way. We do see a stronger indie game market and smaller games and retro games coming back and stuff like that. So, like, maybe that idea is a little elitist or dated per se with where the industry might be trending. But just looking at raw numbers, a single player game costs more to develop than most multiplayer games do, which does hurt their bottom line long term, and why I'm not surprised by the trend with game developers to move towards multiplayer. You know what I mean? And the fact that multiplayer is, I think, more easily monetizable, because we've mentioned some franchises that have moved towards multiplayer. Elder Scrolls Online is the most recent release after Skyrim, right? Warcraft was a real-time strategy game that was between, like, 2 and 4 players, is now massively multiplayer online. World of Warcraft has moved into that. I'm trying to think of some other good examples off the top of my head, but like, it does seem like games are trending in that fashion where, what you said, like, they throw in multiplayer because it feels necessary in Tomb of War, in Last of Us, in Mass Effect, because there's just such profitability in that sector, and
Yep.
to be fair, GoldenEye one of, I think, the greatest multiplayer experiences ever was done as an afterthought, right? Like that wasn't even intended as a feature in the game. Developers threw that in last minute. It went crazy. I do think, multiplayer is just a great business decision if you're looking at it from a purely business decision.
And before I kind of make my point, though, the one faction games too we haven't really talked about too much as fighting games, which MMO, I mean, you kind of buy them for the competition standpoint.
Yeah.
But I think what this kind of comes down to the profitability side of things, and I think kind of bleeds into the tech argument. What ultimately makes a game valuable? Is it profits or is it resonating with its audience? I bring up the tech component because you look at something like Final Fantasy VII and the impact that had on me. And the first time you see graphics like that, as an 8-year-old, you're like, holy shit.
I couldn't play it.
Yeah.
I never, I think you might have heard about this, but like I didn't play Final Fantasy VII when it released. I bought it on Steam much, much, much later as an adult. I really couldn't get through a lot of it before I'm just like, what the fuck is this fucking like
Yeah.
triangle hair and like circle hands? Like,
Yeah. But at the time, those graphics and the
Jesus.
cutscenes were like crazy. It was like, oh my gosh. And I do think when a game resonates with you, it's essentially a subscription model, really. And we talk about it with, newspaper industry, especially, and then, I mean, now with streaming services. How loyal are you then towards the game? And then if you just have a bunch of people playing in an audience, and I will say, Blizzard and WoW has done a great job of this with constant updates, but then you have games like Call of Duty, which it's basically just a cash grab. And I mean, Madden, perfect example of that too. I mean, Madden basically helped
I mean, a lot of the
build the
sports
entire
games, yeah.
culture that we have right now. I mean, the reason gaming is as insanely popular as it is largely because of Madden. I mean, I don't know a single person in the late 90s, early 2000s that wasn't at GameStop at midnight trying to get the new Madden. It just, even play online, you did it. And, that was part of it. It was kind of crazy. But does that make it a great game? I think that's a bit subjective, but I do think there's an element to where the tech component, and we're seeing that a lot with the Switch now. And, you can talk about legacy numbers with all time sales. But these titles, then to see them in Breath of the Wild and remastered into a sense of where like you always envisioned this game to look like this in your childhood mind, and Final Fantasy is a perfect example of that too. You're going to have a massive audience that wants that. You can make the case even with the TMT game we talked about during spectator mode.
Yeah.
It's nothing fancy to beat them up, but it's fresh, updated graphics, and it's like, yeah, why not revisit that? And that you can't quite put a price point on nostalgia. And I think that's kind of the point when I say when it resonates with something, because I think multiplayer games, as long as you have the audience and you have that competition standpoint, it's always going to be there. Whether it's a shitty free to play game like Fortnite, which God, I absolutely hate it, but
I can't
or
tell.
when
You hide
I
it
hate the
well.
fact that you can stop bullets with a makeshift like log cabin wall. Like, get the fuck out of here. It's so stupid.
Yeah, it's because log cabins don't stop bullets. I understand your
But no,
complaint.
it's just, how can you like just pull a wall out of nowhere? My point is Call of Duty, WoW, Overwatch. I think you're always going to have an audience that wants to come back and compete. It's just like fighting games, Mortal Kombat, Injustice, Street Fighter, especially DBZ fighters, even Xenoverse. You're going to have an audience that's going to come back and keep grinding because the competition. Single player games, you don't necessarily have that. So it's like, what is the hook? And I think if you fall in love with the story, quite frankly, I think that is a stronger hook than the idea of like, I'm going to play the same game again and again, and only some things kind of change versus how many more layers can we pull back to this story and these characters. And I think that's where the tech components really come in. And I think no matter what game it is, if it is a fighter or an MMO, I think graphics can still be a massive part of that. I mean, I think as soon as PS5 drops and we see, I'll say God of War, I think that's a perfect example of a game with storytelling and graphics, regardless where you stand on this subject. You see it and you're intrigued, and you're like, I want to see more of that.
I mean, when it comes to the tech achievement side of things, too, we've mentioned graphics obviously several times, and I think we've also seen though that you don't necessarily need hyper realistic graphics to have a compelling game, to have a good game, to have good gameplay. Among Us, has become very popular recently. Very simple graphics. The Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle game coming out, not graphically that taxing on most systems, and it's true of a lot of other games as well. There's been a pursuit maybe of hyper realism for a long time. A lot of people criticize World of Warcraft these days for being cartoonish in its appearance, and there's a lot of other games that have much more realistic graphics in terms of the way they look. But tech achievement goes beyond just the graphical achievements. It goes to water physics. It goes to, you shoot the water, it makes waves, there's ripples, and in some games it was you had no ripples. Then we got to the point where you had just standard ripples coming off your character. It didn't matter what speed you were moving.
I
You
think
know what I
Final
mean?
Fantasy X finally perfected water.
And then you get into where, yeah, you go this way or that way, ripples come off dynamically in different directions. The water is actually reacting to your character being there in some sort of physics-based way. That we've gotten to that. We've gotten that with, even ray tracing and lighting and stuff has gotten so much more advanced and complex with what the technology can do. And then even things that were sort of like quirks before with the technology, take fighting games like invulnerability frames, iframes, where you can't be damaged. I think were originally much of a quirk of the technology at the time of like old Street Fighter and stuff like that. Like it was just because your animation locked you in and you couldn't be interrupted at certain points. It wasn't necessarily like an intentional design element, although it became crucial to the gameplay that was occurring. Where these days that stuff is intentionally designed. Those things are included. How many frames are you invulnerable on certain moves, and then how does that affect your choices for when to use those moves and how to fight and everything else? Like fighting games, that's something which might have had its roots in being an accident, has become core gameplay that's designed and built around and considered by designers because the technology has progressed to that point that we can control that sort of minutia, and I think technology has improved on both sides. It's just, I think their goals are different. In single player games, I think we're looking for much more cinematic experiences, typically speaking. We're looking for a lot more of that immersion in terms of we want those water physics, we want those light physics, we want all that other kind of fun stuff going on. And AI, especially in single player games, has seen huge advances, I think, in the past decade or so. Where in multiplayer is a lot of player interaction systems that have been developed. We have layering and we have phasing, instancing, and stuff that people can be in the same physical space in the game world, but see different things or interacting with different things, or different servers and stuff. We have cross server play now. We have multi platform play, which to say out loud is such a mind blowing thing to someone like me who grew up in the 90s, where like one of the biggest decisions I made as a 90s kid was, what do I buy, PlayStation or Xbox? Because I'm committing to that platform. My parents aren't going to buy me a second one. We don't have that kind of money. You know what I mean? And like you commit to that, and that's your environment. That's where you're at. And I ended up buying Xbox because my friends had Xbox. Like that was the deciding factor. Because if I went PlayStation, despite the fact that I thought it had the better exclusive, the better library, and had more backwards compatibility at the time, Xbox is where my friends were at, and like you cross plays wasn't imaginable that you could play on all these different systems and enjoy your games in that fashion.
No, I mean, I was saying I went PlayStation 2 and 360, and then PS4 now and the Switch. But I think you do hit an interesting point there too with Final Fantasy 7, and it kind of comes back to that first experience and where that kind of steers you. And as you're seeing more games kind of remastered, redeveloped, and too, it's just like you can have a game or a niche audience. It's like, hey, you always talk about a game somebody hasn't played, and now at the remake, it's like, yeah, I've encouraged two friends and friends of the show, J and JT, to go back and play that because the remake is a perfect modern take, and like, yeah, you may not fall in love with the characters the same way I did, but like, it's a fun, awesome hack and slash, and not quite hack and slash over the top. It's a nice blend of both, and it's a good way to reintroduce someone that's never played the game. Uh, and I think that's kind of interesting with the tech component is it's like how much of that culture and those genres and those franchises then will get new audience members because of that. And to the tech side, as much as I hate on Fortnite, just from the idiosyncrasies of meshing a third person shooter with Minecraft, I can't knock the community angle. And as you point out with MMOs, especially in the social component, when you can have a million people logging into a game just to watch a virtual concert, or someone like Juju Smith-Schuster at the Steelers, to have personalities and celebrities basically operating in just a virtual world, I think that's a pretty big cultural thing we don't necessarily talk about. And knock on Fortnite from a gameplay standpoint, but from a cultural standpoint and a tech point, I don't think you can bash it any means in that because
Well, you
we are
definitely made my
seeing
point
a
for me.
mesh. Yeah. No, and unfortunately so. I mean, I think that's part of it, but I think that's where the tech comes into it of what type of immersion is it? Is it the immersion of updated graphics and the storytelling and the narrative? Or is it the immersion of I can have a virtual character in a virtual world with millions of people and
Yeah,
interact?
yeah.
And that's really what it comes down to. I think either way, we're seeing a great point for video games right now. But will single player games, you know, be something of the past and only Nintendo makes them? I don't know. I personally don't think so, but whatever the hell happens with the Fortnite engine and that idea of partaking in virtual concerts and with streaming kind of takes off, I think we're gonna be at an interesting crossroads soon with tech and gaming.
It's weird when we have these conversations. We definitely go down roads that I didn't expect before. But at least for me, and coming back to our main debate a little bit, I think tech achievement lands on the side of MMOs mostly because of what you're talking about very well, and I appreciate your your points here of look at impact, right? Like to a certain extent, I think there's a case to be made maybe that single player has seen more advancements in terms of graphics, in terms of music, dynamic sounds, lighting, physics and particle physics in the games and AI controlled things because a lot more in MMOs is either player driven, so there's no AI needed, or it's a lot more scripted. I think in terms of they have a much more limited AI compared to what you see in single player games. Arguably, the tougher tech achievements are on the single player side of things, but I don't know that that's true for sure. But what I do know is that the tech that's being developed in MMOs, I think, is more culturally impactful for all the reasons you were talking about. And, that's why I'm going to say ultimately, I think when it comes to technology, MMO technology is more impactful and therefore more important. And overall, it just makes MMOs the choice
It comes down to what
of any
you
discerning gamer.
it's the wins and losses argument, It's what makes a game profitable? Is it again the masses playing it or a loyal audience coming back again and again?
It's very interesting because I think in a weird way, this conversation almost boils down to sort of the point that you were sort of making. It's kind of like, what were your initial impressions of games, first experiences, right? Like, if you buy that argument that first experiences and like these sort of moments you have with games and the escapism and stuff like that, then I think, yeah, I understand where you're coming from and I understand why people would side with you in this debate, right? But if you look beyond that, if you look to community, cultural impact, and kind of how games are increasingly playing a role in society and their move towards being like more mainstream accepted and less like the idea of like a nerd plays video games and they get bullied in school, right? Well, the bully's playing video games too. He's going back and he's playing his like Fortnite or
Yeah.
whatever. That's not that whole thing changing has a lot to do with MMOs, so
It's
it
also,
really depends on this individual versus cultural impact in a certain extent.
well, I think we can have an episode dedicated to toxicity and kind of where that intersects because yeah, it's I do think you have a lot of pressed feelings into of nerds and getting lashed out and online bullying, why that exists. But I think that's a whole topic we in a can of worms we should dedicate a whole episode to. But to your point with the first experience though too, I do think if you're PC or Xbox out of the gates, I think you're more aligned with MMOs and Xbox, especially FPS with Halo and the impact that had on Xbox. Because at the time, PS2 is still very single player, and then PS3 even Ratchet and Clank, God of War, it wasn't really a multiplayer aspect to that, at least not out of the gates like it was for Xbox. And then PC, of course, Doom, Half Life was another big one in there too. I'm missing Wolfenstein. I think there was that room for PC to go. And again, with your point with modding, you can kind of make a game whatever the hell you want, which is cool. And then, I mean, Nintendo did that a bit with the amiibos, but it's really just characters. And
Yeah.
Nintendo is the epitome of nostalgia and what you hold dear. But, I don't think you talked about it enough during the argument per se. But the Switch is that communal social aspect. Then, I'm bringing in friends and family to play a game like either Wii Sports or Mario Kart, and it's light competition and a whole lot of entertainment. But that is a multiplayer aspect to that. It's just a bit more communal, but it's very much a retro, come over to my house, fire up Street Fighter, and we're just going to game out on the couch. Not quite the MMO Fortnite kind of aspect to it, but it's the same breadth. And that's, I think, where you get the first experience of it. And then where does that kind of lead you? What's that gateway? Are you going to stick with those types of games, or are you going to try different experiences and, go down different rabbit holes? And, I'm glad we both play each style. But I think we're right now it's a good time to be a gamer. It's a good time to be a nerd. I think overall, if I'm going to have to, I hate admitting a loss, but I think overall, you can make the case that it's kind of a chicken versus the egg kind of thing.
Come on.
Without single player
Come on.
games and Mario, you wouldn't have video games at all, and Atari and Frogger and Pong. But with the culture aspect and what we're seeing now with the MCU and so much, I don't think nerdom and geekdom would be on the precipice the same way without MMO gaming.
And there it is, folks. You heard it here. I fully agree with you because like I said, when I was making my arguments, I specifically had to limit things to current trends, current numbers, literally last year to 5 years or something. Because if we look at the roots of video game, we look at all time. You're right. Single player game is what built it. And you talked about nostalgia. You talked about first experiences. You talked about story, and the way we sort of interact with the game and stuff like that. And a lot of that is I think in favor of single player games as being maybe the superior form of gaming in terms of impact, in terms of current trends, in terms of what's getting sold and consumed these days and stuff. It's definitely moving in the way of MMOs. You know what I mean? And I guess as someone, we started this episode off a little bit talking about being between generations and seeing where things started and where things are now. And I would love for things to trend towards weird homogeny almost. I would love to see games trending back towards those 2 to 4 player local co-ops that you're still able to get a couple people in there. It's not massively online. You're not dealing with literally thousands of people, but you're also able to then, with the more limited scope, have those more character driven storylines and stuff like that your choices matter. And something like Divinity Original Sin for me was a phenomenal game. If you haven't played it, it's a turn-based game. It's very in the style of a D&D-esque type game. But the way it works is you get different stories, you get different endings to different quest lines based on what you say. Well, how's that determined? Who talks? Who spoke to that NPC first is now the one in charge of the conversation, and they get to drive that story for that. You know what I mean? You split up, you go wandering one part of the map, someone else does. Well, then you get pulled into a combat while your team's running to catch up to you. You know what I mean? It lets you kind of have those sort of individual experiences while combining those multiplayer elements of having other party members who are also interacting with the world at the same time and affecting change. And I would love to see more games in that style that begin to mix some of the best of both worlds.
No, I'm with you. And you mentioned cross-platform before, and I think that's a good intersection as well. Because even with games like Gears and Borderlands, to where you have much more of a joyous time co-oping, Gears especially through the campaign. Yes, it's a selling point for the consoles and the developers, but I do think then from a gaming standpoint, yes, you could introduce and do a lot more then, because then you could play with somebody on PC, on a PlayStation or an Xbox and go through that. And it's yeah, we can have the same shared experience and we can, be with the friends and people we want to play with without having to have, a bias or, even economic kind of issues there too, where it's you can't afford a new Xbox. I know when I played Destiny on 360, Xbox One came out and I basically got rid of the game then because all my boys got Xbox One. And I was like, all right, well, that's not exactly as much fun then since my crew, upgraded. And, what are you going to do? Now, if that was crossplay, yeah, different story. I'd have friends on PlayStation or PC, then it's yeah, you can still play. And I think it's an interesting bit just because I think those co-op stories are a nice mesh of both worlds.
So with those sort of closing thoughts, I guess that brings our discussion to a close. I'm going to chalk this up for a win in my book. I'm sure somebody's going to agree with me.
No, I mean, I think I conceded at the end there, and
Feels that way. It feels
30.
that
I mean,
way.
32 years. I mean, you can pat yourself in the back. You got Neil Strebig to back down in a debate.
Is this a first for
Yeah.
you?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure like Haley's Comet's flying by in the daylight here.
Is that pigeon hog, man? It came in and you were just
Yeah. No, I think it's a cultural thing. And again, that's why I say it's a kind of a chicken and the egg. You can make a case for either or and go round and round, but we wouldn't be here without single player games. But where we are right now, and again, like from a cultural standpoint, and I think precipice is the appropriate word to use. You're seeing, as you said, with RPG gaming, it's the same type of development as blockbuster movies and big budgets, but we're not used to seeing video games in that type of medium and have that kind of cultural impact to where you have, you know, I applied for screenwriting jobs on games, and it's like it's creative writing backgrounds and how many screenplays, and basically I haven't written a TV show, so I'm not going to get any of those jobs. But like you look at that, that's the type of writers you're getting in these games.
yeah.
So it's not that far of a leap. It's just we're not accustomed. It's still very, and everything moves so fast. There's still a large portion of the population that considers gamers to either just be, mouth breathers in their basement or toxic players playing Call of Duty. It's not viewed as, yeah, this is a viable medium. This is a viable culture, and this very epitome of art.
Yeah. And when we talk about art, for me, one of the things has been appreciating video game music. They started selling like video game music as its own separate thing. I have a Pandora channel now for that. I don't know if I've ever really paid attention to it. You know what I mean? Like, it was just a background thing while I'm doing. That's the battle music. That's the exploration music. That's the sneaking music. Like, I knew what the things were. You could pick up on the tone that was being conveyed. But just listening to the music and appreciating its cinematic qualities and just it's really, really good on its own, even outside the video game, is incredible. And can't diminish the very good work that goes into single player games. Can't diminish their impact and how, as you said, kind of chicken and the egg, like it's led to where we are today on the MMO side of things. But ultimately, you know what I mean? I think games are becoming more mainstream. I think they are becoming more social. I think it's becoming more common for people to spend social time interacting while gaming or through gaming as the medium. It's not just let's go to the park and shoot some hoops or play some catch or whatever. It's like let's also like jump on and play some games.
Yeah.
And for me, that's a great change. I'm very happy to see it.
No, same. But I mean, with that, I think we have to go to the what are you playing? What are you watching? What the hell are you up to?
Well, good news in World of Warcraft, as we talked about it all this time, I have found a guild. I think I'm riding the bench for a minute here, but long story short, that's resolved and a positive in my life. League of Legends, I'm also going to make an attempt this year to actually place. I've been sort of playing the game after we've talked about MMOs all this time. I play the game, I log in, I get my daily win, and then I log out. I don't really get competitive with it, but I'm probably going to see what I can do this year for placing. And in terms of watching, just finished watching Pacific Rim Black on Netflix, which was surprisingly mediocre. I think the franchise, the Pacific Rim franchise in general, has a lot of potential, and I was expecting maybe more from it than what they delivered. But it wasn't bad. You know what I mean? If they come out with a season 2, I would happily watch that as well. It's not something that I would drop, but I feel like it didn't live up to its potential.
I've heard good things with it. Mech animes are kind of hit or miss with me sometimes, but I have heard it's really, really good. For me, Avengers been the main game. Still going through Final Fantasy's remake, Final Fantasy VII remake on hard, but finally did max out a character in Avengers with Black Widow. Having a lot of fun with that. It is a grind. It is kind of I don't want to say a bore to get there, but it is a grind to get to the campaign and get to the actual Avengers initiative. But once you do start leveling up characters, it does feel like you're playing those characters, which is fun.
Out of curiosity, how much do you think that hurt the initial reviews?
I think tremendously. I mean, it took me, I've had it for months and I finally just got to the point now. So kind of put some perspective. And
yeah,
show wise, Attack on Titan, excited for the final season. Curious what's going to happen in the final 3 episodes, but we'll have a whole episode dedicated to that once it is out. You binge it, and we can talk about the craziness of this season. And then, I mean, next episode we're going to be kind of switching things up. Probably have a guest on the show. Now, not
Hopefully.
clear cut, but hopefully we have a comic book shop owner kind of talking about comic book life, how the industry is working with the pandemic, and or going into some D&D stuff with a friend of the show, one of our buddies that's you play with and play
Yep.
WoW with as well.
Yeah, that's true.
But as always, guys, thanks for listening. Appreciate the support. Give us a subscribe. Follow us on Twitter and Instagram at savedover_pod. And as always, guys, appreciate the support. Thanks for listening.